So the next item on our agenda is we wanted to talk about the latest telemetry technology that's going on. Paul Link is with Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, and you've done a lot of bird banding over the years, and you've gotten into the telemetry business. And why don't you talk a little bit about how the technology of telemetry has changed?
There's transmitters out now that are down into the sub-gram weights that are capable of collecting location data, very accurate XY GPS data. And additional accelerometer-based data that can tell you altitude and heading sensor and speed and percent cloud cover and all kinds of information. A lot of these transmitters are capable of burst mode type data collection. Some of the bigger transmitters that people have on golden eagles, for instance, can almost give you a live image of where that bird is going with a duty cycle of every second. It can tell you where that bird is, what speed it's flying, its altitude and everything. The white fronts that we've been radio marketing now, you can really conservatively get a location every 15 minutes, 24/7 for multiple seasons. So it's just a really exciting time.
And that the magical wand and kind of all this is cell phone service. Kind of you're talking 5G, because all of these little backpacks all bounce the information through cell phone service. Is that correct? So
correct.
As long as a bird's in cell phone range, just like we were making a phone call, he's downloading information. Is that correct?
Yeah. And that's the real benefit to this GPS GSM technology, is the data transmission is quick and cheap. Each one of these transmitters basically has an unlimited data plan, and every day you can program it multiple times a day if you have a strong enough battery, where you can tell that bird to send a text message, essentially, to send all of its data, back to the mothership. And so I have most of mine programmed like the white fronts, 7:30 in the morning, to try to make that connection where they dial up a number and try to send the data. If they don't have service, they drop the call, they store all the data, it sits there in a file, it says unsent. The next day, it tries again, 7:30, tries to connect. If it can connect, it sends the whole file, it checks everything as sent, and it goes back into the hard drive of the unit. The white fronts in particular, they're going to the high Arctic for 90 or 100 days a year. They still collect the information, and then when they return to Prairie Canada in September, they have it all on board. They're still trying to connect, and some of them do connect, at those little Arctic research posts and communities. But by and large, when they return to civilization, all that data is on board. A lot of these units, they can store over 1 million data points on them. So there's folks that are doing snowy owl research where a snowy owl can go to the Arctic for 3 years and come back into Prairie Canada, brutal, winter, and transmit 3 years worth of data literally just like that in a split second. It can transmit all that stuff. And that's beneficial over what we were using the previous 20 years with satellite telemetry.
Real quick, the old stuff, I used to go out in a truck, antenna on the roof, try to find the beat, triangulate the bird.
Yep.
Then if you couldn't find him in the truck, it involved an airplane going up. Airplane had to make a search. So basically, you're doing everything with a cup of coffee, or in your case, Mountain Dew in the mornings, sitting there on your computer and getting all this information. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. But again, there's a time and place for everything. Those old units, they were $250. Those VHF units would last up to 200 days. They're lightweight, they're small, and they are just battery proven. That's all that thing does is beep, 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 beep. You can have almost unlimited frequencies, and you can go find it 24/7. If you have a mortality signal, you can code them to pulse double or triple, their rate, so you know when it's dead, and you can go find it. that's critical for cost-specific mortality studies, is you need to be able to go recover the unit. We went through a transition with PTT transmitters where that satellite Argos uses algorithms and Doppler shift of satellites to estimate locations. And then a few years later, they came up with GPS PTT transmitters where they can get very, tight, precise 20-meter accuracy locations where they're using all kinds of satellites to acquire location, just like a handheld GPS unit. But then they're transmitting it back up to the satellites, and you're having to purchase the data, through Argos, through CLS America. And the benefit of that is those birds can't hide. I mean, they can go to the Arctic and they transmit every day. They can go, to Baja, California and transmit every day, independent of cell service. But the transmitters are very expensive, and the data transmission is very expensive. And you're talking $7,000 or $8,000 for an individual, $4,000 to buy a transmitter, and then $2,000 to $3,000 for data acquisition costs. And you're talking best case scenario with a really strong battery, you can maybe get 5 to 7 locations a week, over the course of an annual cycle. Whereas these units now we're able to get, 15-minute, even down to the teal 10-gram transmitters every hour, is realistic, and you can probably go 30 minutes, on good high pressure days with no cloud cover.
So it's been really cool to see the maps of where some of these birds have been going, but there's more to it than that, and in the case of the speckled bellies, and I'm sure we're going to talk some more what you're actually doing, you're ground truthing where these birds are stopping at. That's real important because you're looking at the habitat of how much time are they spending in moist soil, rice fields, that kind of stuff. And so I know we're early in your studies, and so a lot of this stuff has not been officially published or released yet, but you're finding out some really cool stuff with what kind of habitat speckled bellies are using. And more recently, Grosse Savanne is proud to be a helper with you. We provided some spots to do some trapping and stuff after the season. And a lot of this, and we're going to talk about this later too, has been private funded dollars that have helped buying these telemetry devices. But it's been really interesting to see what these birds are doing. And so why don't you give us a scenario? You've done white-fronted geese, and this is how many years now have you been putting?
4 years of deployment so far.
You're on 4, and you've let some of the people participate and look at some of the maps of where these birds are going. And the thing that probably has been most shocking to me, and I think a lot of people in our area, is that we're seeing our migration of speckled bellies or white-fronted geese come down prior to the season, October. You're putting telemetry on some of them, and then when the season starts, they're going backwards.
Yeah.
They're not hanging around anymore. And I use the word reverse migration loosely, but in a sense, we're seeing birds go the opposite direction when duck season opens here in Louisiana.
We see that a lot.
Tell us a little bit about some of the crazy movements you've seen in some of those birds.
Yeah, especially the first couple of years of the project, we saw a lot of that where we'd have birds show up in October, very limited habitat on the landscape here, but literally no habitat, in the mid-latitude states. So a lot of those birds, they leave prairie Canada, like clockwork in September and October, and they just come here. They aren't hopscotching their way down. 95% of our birds, as they cross the U.S.-Canada border, they aren't stopping until they get to southeast Arkansas or Louisiana in most cases. And then there is a lot of that, the first couple of years we had what I've talked with Larry a lot about a hard opener, where our goose seasons and our duck seasons in the coastal zone opened on the same date, and we saw huge disturbance effects driving birds out of the state, where opening day would come and we'd have the first year of the project, we only had 11 marked birds. I put 7 transmitters out pre-season, and by the Sunday evening of opening weekend of the coastal zone, all 7 were either out of the state of Louisiana or out of the coastal zone. Within 36 hours of the onset of hunting season, they had all left.
And we're not just talking moving a couple counties, we're talking moving all the way back up into Arkansas.
Yeah.
And I think in one case last year, you had a bird went all the way back to Indiana after he was banded here in Louisiana.
Every year, yeah, we've had a couple birds that end up in the Illinois River Valley.
Have you been able to see a shift eastward with speckled belly population?
Especially in the spring, we're seeing a lot of migrations north where they're really swinging east. there's a lot of birds. We had a bird that hung up outside of, God, I can't think of the damn bird now. And it was right on the south shore of Lake Michigan, hung up for 4 or 5 days, on its way north, and then hooked back around. Their fall migration is very different, than their spring migration, and their fall migration is very fast. It's literally a one-night shot. They pick up at sunset and they're settling down in Louisiana.
And you basically documented birds moving 1,000 miles in a day? That's so,
nonstop.
We think of birds, working their way down, but we actually, and it works both ways going back, because we did a blue-winged teal study here recently, and a blue-winged teal left Opelousas and ended up in North Dakota in 48 hours or something? 24 hours. So how many miles we're talking about?
1,180.
So a blue-winged teal leaves Louisiana and flies 1,100 miles overnight to where he's going to breed at. That's pretty incredible.
Mm-hmm. I know Casey probably say the same thing, although we're getting more earlier now, but speckled bellies in the fall, when you first, you hear them at night going over and they ain't stopping.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you get them coming back. Now I think we're getting more to stop early now, but for the most part, snow geese too. They're crossing us first and then coming back. You don't start getting snow geese on the ground until later in the year.
So you started out with white fronts. You've been into that a couple of years now. I know this year we worked with you, and you've expanded that now to, we did some mallards which you're kind of referring to them as coastal mallards, because we think the mallards in Louisiana may have their own unique niche of where they come from and how they migrate, and so hopefully some of that is going to shed some light on that. And you also moved into some blue-winged teal, because nobody's really done any research on what blue-winged teal do, so that's going to be some really cool stuff. And I think what's going to be interesting to see that is where they go when they leave Louisiana. How far south do they go? Because we talk about bird movement, and I know growing up as a kid, and my dad, when we had a big rain, he always said the birds moved, and in our minds they went from the marsh to the rice fields. But I think what Paul's showing us is we're talking, when we say birds move, they're getting up overnight and they're going a long way. And for a bird to come from Canada to Louisiana in a nonstop flight, it's not a problem then for him to go from Louisiana to Mexico and wherever else in a nonstop flight and potentially come back. So when people start talking about bird movement, I think you've got to bring in a whole nother dimension as to where these birds are going, how far they're moving, how frequently they're moving. And it sounds like we can even relate gun pressure to why they're moving, and obviously habitat, where the food's at. So we're really excited to see what information is going to come out of that. And but as exciting as that is, there's also some downsides to telemetry, and one of them is money. I mean, they're obviously the price is coming down daily, as with any electronics. They started out high and they're getting cheaper by the day, they're getting better by the day, but it still takes a lot of money. And in your case, we've actually done some private funding to help you guys out to buy some stuff, and a lot of the speckled belly stuff, the blue-winged teal, some of that has been from private dollars. And I know in Louisiana, the Louisiana Wildlife Foundation has been a really good resource for private donors to donate money to the foundation to be used in studies. And even some of this stuff can go to grad students. There's a lot of new interest, I guess, in doing this. And Dr. Heitmeyer, you did a lot of telemetry work too back on some coastal mallards and stuff, and had some really cool information on bird movement even in the Missouri, Canada area from Europe.
I personally didn't, but the use of telemetry to answer questions is old, of course, but now with the technology, all the new things, and a lot of maybe what you're referencing with mallards was a coordinated study back to this notion of a continental resource. And Mississippi Flyway, Larry, you can speak to this, actually helped support both in finances as well as administrative support. That birds were marked in Arkansas, in Missouri, in North Dakota, and marvelous data set about where these mallards were going, how long they were stopping in certain places. Some of the questions hunters this past year have asked, the telemetry data now are lending itself to being able to answer some of those things. Has the stopover time changed, or have the pattern changed? And again, back to the evolution of how these birds use the whole continent. And that's part of the cool thing about waterfowl, is they don't just stay in one spot, but they're adapted to using this whole environment in their migration route. And if it's dry here one year, well, they'll overfly and go someplace else. If it's wet there the next year, they'll stop. And we've got band data to show that. We've got midwinter data to show that. We've got telemetry data to show it. So there's a lot of biology and a lot of science, a lot of data that then we can help answer the questions that hunters sometimes have. And some of the responses are weather related, some of the responses are habitat related, and just what you said, Paul, some of the responses are harvest related. So all that's cool because it gets to those core kind of things we talked about at the very beginning of this session.
So we were talking about the negatives with expenses being one, but also in Larry, you're in statistics. You got some degrees in math, and that's kind of your deal. But I'm
the nerd at the table, huh?
when the academic world looks at telemetry, though, because of its sample size, really provides some cool information. But maybe it's not information that can be. It's such a small sample size. How useful is it? I guess. And so, why don't you talk about the limitations of telemetry, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Like every other scientific tool, it's designed to collect particular information. And radio telemetry, especially the things that we're doing now, can really fill in the gaps in our understanding that lead us to additional studies to clear up uncertainties. For example, Mickey talks a lot about the evolutionary history of waterfowl. Why would a white-fronted goose fly from the Canadian border directly to the state of Louisiana? Because they know it takes a lot of energy to fly. Flight is the biggest energy expenditure that waterfowl have. So when you fly somewhere, you damn well better land somewhere where there are resources available to you. And where are resources available to you in the Mississippi Flyway in a very predictable, evolutionary scale way? The coastal marshes of Louisiana. There's gonna be water there. There's gonna be food there. So when you take off and fly, you wanna hit somewhere where those resources are available. I catch heat every single year. Why does the coastal zone open before the east zone or more northern parts? Ducks migrate from north to south. Yes, they do, but they also go back. We learned from Bobby Cox's radio telemetry study. We can't get that information from banding. Banding won't give us that information. We can't fly enough aerial surveys to get that information. But radio telemetry, especially this stuff we have now, fills that in. When those hunters in Indiana said, man, finally the white-fronted geese came down. No, they didn't. They came from Louisiana. One of them was carrying a radio that Paul put on in October. Crestfallen those Indiana hunters were to find out that those white-fronted geese were coming back up. Radio telemetry is the only way we figured that out. Looking at habitat use, the amount of time that birds are spending. The study that Mickey referenced with the mallards, we saw mallards going from Missouri to Arkansas, back to Missouri, into Iowa, and then back to Arkansas again. These are movements that we had no way of ever determining. And now with the GPS technology, now we can see that those birds are using WRP habitat. So now we can monitor the cost effectiveness of our large-scale habitat programs. Are they working? Are ducks using them? We now have the ability to do that. But sample sizes are small. Okay, we've got a duck population of 5 million birds. Let's just say there are 5 million mallards on the landscape, completely making up a number. The study that Mickey's talking about, that numerous papers were written on, we had data on 38 birds. 38 out of 5 million. Now, we learned an incredible amount, but how representative is that? The sample size is small. That gives us a fairly low amount of power to talk, to make inferences from our data. And so that's why it's so critical. The way Paul is attacking these radio telemetry studies is, in my opinion, the way it needs to be done. He is networking. Like right now, we're talking about mallards in Louisiana. But radios were put on mallards in Minnesota. Radios are being put on mallards in South Dakota. Tennessee just landed a large research grant to put radios on a bunch of mallards. So taken together, now we're getting 200, 300, 500 mallards on the landscape. We are continuing this white-fronted goose work. Paul has partnered with Dr. Bart Ballard at Texas A&M University Kingsville, with Dr. Mitch Wiegman at University of Missouri, with Dr. Doug Osborne at University of Arkansas, Monticello. And these scientists are working in network to increase those sample sizes, increase the representativeness. Mickey has suggested in this conversation that there are subpopulations of mallards specifically. Paul says coastal mallards. And so representativeness is extremely important. If you're going to capture all of your birds over a bait pile, you're going to get birds that are in a poor enough physical condition to need to go to that bait pile. Representativeness is incredibly important when your sample size is 20 or 40 or 50. And so, like everything else, you have to consider the scientific methodology you're using, the data it can provide, and those limitations. And Paul has been especially diligent at partnering and networking with other scientists to fill in all that really cool information. We got Y-fronts migrating back north and doing it when it's freaking cold. You know, that white-fronted goose that ended up in Indiana was during a very cold part of the winter. And so we're filling in that information that allows us to look at the ecological capabilities of these birds, expand the scale at which we're looking at the habitat, and by networking with these other researchers, getting the sample size up to where it becomes extremely reliable information.